Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. We are back here in the new studio with Sarah Curry today, ready for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of the gold standard in Iowa conservative entertainment. Sarah, welcome to the new studio.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, you were laughing at my intro music.
Well, I just got done watching the Wyatt Earp documentary on Netflix, and so when you started playing it, it just made me think of that. And we're going to talk about local government, and Tombstone was definitely local government. So anyway, just made me laugh.
It's not supposed to be Tombstone. It's just supposed to be cool, but Ingstead likes it. So that, if he's happy, I'm happy, right?
So I thought about Tombstone in the Wild West.
Okay, good. Well, then you need to sort of bring that same energy to what we're going to talk about today. So anyway, you like the studio, you like the intro music, you're ready to go. What have you been working on lately?
Well, Iowa just had their September special elections, so that impacted property taxes. And actually later this week, the deadline will come up and I get to pull the data to see who is having bond elections in November. So I know everyone's focused on the presidential election, but you know me, I'm going to look at what no one else is watching, and that's property taxes.
I think, and we're glad that you do it. I want to take a step back and set the stage for this a little bit, because you already said something, and I want to make sure people understand what goes into you looking at all of this. So when it's a bond election or a whatever other ballot question there is at the local level, these aren't always real easy to find, right?
No, they're extremely difficult to find.
Even if you live in that community, you may not know what's going on. So why is it hard to find? What goes into you trying to get this very basic information of what's actually going to be on the ballot?
So most people are familiar with going to the Secretary of State's website, and you can see all the election results there. It's exceptionally helpful when you have a school district election, because many of our school districts span multiple counties. Unfortunately, that's only the case for primary and general elections. When we have many of these special elections, actually all of the special elections, the Secretary of State does not report on that. There's no data kept. It's kept with the county auditors, which are also your local commissioners of elections. And so for me to find out what local elections are happening across Iowa, I have to email all 99 county auditors and ask them what is going to be on their ballot. And they are tired of hearing from me, I can assure you, because I do it now 4 times a year. But that's the only way I can find it. And so I have to manually go through. I create my list of all 99 auditors, make sure I hear from everybody, pull their sample ballots, and then I cross-reference to see which ones are in multiple counties because of school districts and stuff. And I create the list, and that's what I have for you on ITR Foundation.
And you would think that something as important as elections that have significant impact on property taxes, which is one of the top, if not top, issues on the minds of Iowa voters, that it'd be a little easier to find this information, or that somebody else was pulling it together, but they are not. Right?
Oh, it gets better. Okay. So when the results come in, right, you want to know if it passed or not. A lot of, again, school districts cross multiple counties. Right. So I can't just go to one county auditor and see if it won. All they get are the results from their county.
Right.
So let's say a school district's in 4 different counties. Now I have to contact 4 different county auditors. I have to figure out what the turnout is in each one of those counties, and then I have to add it up and put it together. Now, if I wait long enough, it'll all get compiled and I can ask one of them. But who wants to wait 3 weeks for an election result? So it's hard on the front end, and then it's also hard on the back end. But that's why I'm here, to bring that cutting-edge information to our listeners.
Well, you're a great American, Sarah. So how long before... So we're going to talk a little bit about what just happened in the recent local elections, and then we'll pivot into what's coming up on the general election ballot. But how long before, and I'm driving at this idea that the system doesn't work very well the way it is. How long before the election does that information need to be public? So if I'm running school district X, and I'm going to ask voters to vote on $20 or $30 million worth of bonding, how long before that election does that actually have to go to the auditor and become public?
40 days.
Okay.
Before the election. So that'll be this Thursday.
Okay. So just so we're clear on timeline, is this Thursday, which will be 40 days before the general election, was when you will find out whether your school or city or county wants to have you decide on one of these bond elections. And I can tell you, as somebody who's been involved in a lot of political campaigns in Iowa, that is not enough time.
So I will tell you, like, we know that Lewis Central is holding.
Well, they've got one every time, so we just assume that Lewis
Well, they have a
Central's on the
bond
ballot.
election. I know Buchanan County has an EMS levy. I know Dallas County has a bond coming up for its jail. So a lot of these we do know before the 40-day timeline, but by law, they don't have to submit them to the auditor until 40 days. And so while I might find out about them through the news or through word of mouth, thanks to our members communicating with us, I don't have actual proof, I guess, or
the actual
or the
numbers.
language, right? I don't have any of that. The auditors actually don't have any of that until 40 days before the election at the earliest. And I promise you, I'll email some of these auditors, and they are all acting in good faith. And they say, "Well, I haven't gotten everything yet. I'm still expecting stuff." So that 40-day deadline is really soft. Sometimes they don't even get it by then.
And if you are, there's a lot that goes into municipal bonding. There's a lot of agreements and that has to go into putting this in a position to be on the ballot. They can let voters know ahead of time.
And many of the schools do, because they're
do.
trying to build that campaign of trying to build support and get that word out. I guess from the voters' perspective, if you want a sample ballot and you want to know everything so you can research your candidates and your issues, you're not given a lot of time. The other problem is, like, the Newspapers Association and the radios. They don't have the manpower or the time, or they don't hire nerds like you guys, like I am, to go and search for all this stuff. And so they can't even report on it.
Right.
And so there's just a information problem out there.
So that's what we're trying to fill. So I wanted everyone to hear that for two reasons. One, I want them to appreciate all the hard work that you're doing to accumulate all this information. One, so we can see trends statewide, see what's going on, report on it. And just let folks in those communities know, hey, this is happening again. And so that's important. And then I think that there are some issues there that I'd like to see the legislature deal with at some point on timeline, data reporting, election, results, the compilation of those things. I think there's ways to make that work better than it does now. But so anyway, so you've done this, and because I love campaigns and elections, this is part of your work that I stay the most interested in. So we moved, let's see, was it 2 years ago to November only bond elections, or was it anyway?
It was last year. It was in May of 23. They passed that law.
So this is now we have in Iowa the municipal bonding can only happen in November on the general election ballot.
That's correct.
Okay, but there are still a handful of things that can be voted on the traditional, is it 2 or 3 other times during the year. So we just had that in September being one of those dates. So what are some of the things that were on the ballot in Iowa, I guess just last week?
So there's a personal, it's essentially a infrastructure property tax levy for schools. It's called PEPL.
The PEPL levy, yep.
Those are typically enacted for 10 years. So when voters vote on those, it's creating a tax increase for 10 years. Many school districts, just every 10 years, they have the election. It's when low voter turnout occurs, or people in their district are okay with their property tax levy. And so it just keeps getting renewed. The other thing that is new, that is the result of some 2021 legislation, is a property tax levy specifically for emergency management. I am looking into that right now. We can talk about more of that later, and I can share some of the stuff I've learned. But those are a lot of the big things. There's some other ones like revenue purpose statements, which we've talked about in other episodes, and then also a debt service levy. So if you are a school district and you wish to issue a bond, you also have to ask your voters for the property taxing authority to pay for that bond. And so there's a little hiccup in the law. We have a technical correction we need to make, but there were 3 districts that were asking for a debt service levy in September ahead of their November bond ask.
Okay.
So we did have those in September. Yeah.
Would it be an oversimplification to say that in March and September is the only time you can ask for the authority to actually go into debt on one of these agreements is in November, but the the property tax levies that kind of underlie that, those can be voted on at other times during the year. Is that an oversimplification?
No, that's exactly what it is. And I think it was really just an oversight of the legislation. Lawmakers, rightfully so, were focused on the bonds and just looking at the timing of it. Now it's interesting. It's a, what is it? Elections in even years. So in odd years, they can ask for the debt service levy. So it's just a technical correction in the legislation. But that's why in these 3 school districts, we saw a debt service levy in September for a bond in November.
So we had PEPA levies, EMS levies, and debt service levies that were on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about turnout in these elections. Just broadly, you don't need to go into specifics, but there were 2 or 3 that I was actually impressed with. There was a lot of voter turnout.
Well, I want you to keep that a lot figure pretty
okay.
relative.
Relative to what normal turnout is in these.
And so I want listeners to understand what normal turnout is. Iowa historically has been one of the highest turnout states when it comes to elections. And that's just because of our history being, the first in the nation caucus, and voters in Iowa typically are more aware of what's going on than in other states. So when I look at general election turnout, which is what's going to happen in November, I mean, some places are having 70% voter turnout. Like it's relatively high if you think about it. So for these special elections, it's really, really interesting when for schools, we were probably averaging only 20% turnout. And for these EMS levies, we were now averaging maybe 10%. So when you look at overall, for city and county altogether, the total turnout was only 10.5%.
Yeah.
So yeah, not very high. And
how many of these measures? Most of them passed, right?
Most of them passed. So, there were only 4 that failed.
Okay. What were there? Are there anything that we can glean from that about what led to a failure? Because it looked to me like, in general, the higher turnout meant it was more likely to fail, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
So Clarinda had a PEPL of $1.34, and you have to understand in Clarinda, this is the 4th time they've asked voters for a property tax increase in 18 months. And so their taxpayers have just repeatedly said no over and over and over again. And the school district and the superintendent specifically has felt like, well, let's just keep asking. And at some point, voter fatigue will set in and they'll say yes. They said no again. All the other PEPLs passed. I don't know if it's because it was only for $1.34 or 67 cents. The debt service levies, those all failed. And the debt service levy is much higher. It's $4.05. Yeah. And so I don't know if the reason why those failed is because people understand debt and they understand bonds and they understand interest rates more than just a property tax increase. I will tell you, in the failures, the turnout was extremely high compared to the PEPLs that passed.
Yeah, that's interesting. And maybe it's a debt service levy on a bond is a little easier to understand than getting into the alphabet soup of PEPL and all the other. I don't know if there's a common theme on that, but it's interesting to me.
Well, I will say most of the PEPLs, they had them in place at their school district,
that was the other,
and they're renewing it. And so what the school districts can say is, well, this isn't a property tax increase. And so I equate it to you paying off.
Say it, but it's disingenuous, but that's fine.
Well, yeah. So let's say you have a car note and you pay your car off. And instead of taking that savings and redirecting it, you immediately run out and buy a new car for the same note. That's essentially what these school districts did. So had they not renewed it, people would have seen a property tax savings, but because it's renewed, their bills have stayed consistently high.
But for the action of that school district, my property taxes would be lower.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. I might have been paying the $1.30 is $1.34. I might have been paying the $1.34. If they would do nothing, I wouldn't be paying the $1.34 anymore. But now they're going to reinstitute it and tell me that it's not a tax increase. No, because if you just do nothing, I could pay less. It's a tax increase.
Right.
Maybe it's justified, but I'm tired of this game of, And they do it on the other bond elections too, where, oh, well, we had one before that we're paying the bond off, but we need to keep going because everybody's used to paying this.
I think people have started to figure that out. It's spending, it's debt. I do want to correct myself. Sorry. The percentage of people voting no was in that 20% category. Total turnout for school district elections in September. Sorry, that was only 8.5% voter turnout.
Which is why, and we want that to be higher. That's what we're trying to get to. And it'll be interesting to see what these numbers look like looking ahead to the November election, because now that's, what did you say statewide turnout might be this fall?
I mean, Iowa consistently is around the 60 to 70 percentile
and in a
turnout.
presidential could be higher than that.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. I'm a data nerd, as all of our listeners know, so I'm going to compare last fall's bond elections to this fall's and just see if turnout has any impact on that.
Well, I'm sure it will be higher. It'll be interesting to see if this means that more things pass or more things fail. Now, as I think regular voters know, a general election every 2-year ballot in Iowa has a lot of stuff on it.
It does, and I do think some of these issues are going to be drowned out, for lack of a better term, at the bottom of the ballot. So we'll just have to see. That's what's kind of fun about data and statistics is learning all this stuff and seeing how it works. But really, the thing that strikes me is we hear from Iowans every day about how high their property taxes are and what can they do, and they're tired of paying high property taxes. And then when there's a property tax increase on the ballot, it passes. And so is that because of low voter turnout? Right now, I would say yes, because that's what is pointing towards. If we had 25, 30, even 40% voter turnout on some of these school PEPLs, would it have changed their outcome? I personally would feel better if a significant amount of my peers and my community voted for something instead of 8% voted for something and signed me up. And so I want people to understand some of the numbers on this, okay? Some of these issues passed with 164 votes. We had another property tax increase for 10 years, mind you. 89 people made the decision for their entire district. And I just don't feel like that's representation of the people. If it truly is, then we should have higher voter turnout. The other issue I found with the September elections is that all of these issues were approved by their local governments in July. Well, I know I was on vacation in July. I was not paying attention to what my local government was doing. And then when I called to get more information about it, everybody was out of the office on vacation at the state fair. So here I am a week before the election, and I feel guilty. I don't have anything on our website because I can't get all the information because everyone's on vacation. So the September election, harvest is in full swing right now. I just don't feel like it is genuine to have these elections in September. I think you were in the legislature, right, when we used to have school elections in September?
Yes.
And because of low voter turnout, you changed them to November because you just wanted more voter engagement. So it's a known thing. I'm not making this up. So we'll see. Maybe we'll just move it and I think getting rid of the September special election needs to happen. March is a little bit more, people are aware of it, other than running away to warmer weather. You're kind of stuck in your house paying attention to things in February and March.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you look at we really are going to need to do some real work on the data on the November election, for that reason that there is so much stuff on the ballot. And I get it. We don't want, 86 or whatever people deciding. We'll just have to see what it looks like, because folks are going to vote on all the federal offices. We don't have a Senate race, but they're going to vote on the state legislature. They're going to be voting on county supervisor races. They're going to be voting on 2 constitutional amendments that are on this ballot. Then you turn your ballot over. I'm not mistaken, you even go down to like township trustees, or maybe those are only
they are on the ballot this year.
Then you've got, soil and water commissioner. You've got your hospital, community college board of directors. And then you get to judicial retention elections that all has to be put on this one piece of paper. And somewhere in there, and I'm not quite sure what order they come in, it's probably on the back side of the piece of paper, you're going to have this decision on whether my city or county or school should take on a whole bunch of new debt. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot, I think, for an individual voter to have to try and process all of those things. And I don't know whether the default is to just vote yes on it or if the default is to just vote no on it. We're gonna learn what that is.
And I don't want to disregard the importance of our national presidential election. I think voter engagement is very important, but the farther down you go on the ballot is the bigger impact you have to your daily life. Regardless of who wins president, my township trustee and that school bond and those local officials have more of an impact on my daily life than the president ever will.
And yet the more and more I fear that people just aren't paying attention down there. And that's the whole premise of what we're trying to do, is to just bring more awareness of how important those issues are, and get people connected and get them to show up and vote and engage in the process. So it's good. In looking at what's coming up in November, we know a few places that there's going to be some significant bond elections out there. Have you any you can report on yet that you know are going to be on there that you're tracking already? Well,
so Lewis Central does have a school bond. Last November, they asked for $90 million. This year, their superintendent, I will give the school district credit. They sent out a survey. They asked people what they wanted, and they have lowered that ask to $30 million. I think that's responsible. I don't know the specifics of the bond, but I think listening to your constituents and trying to lower that total amount after it failed by such a wide margin is at least showing that you're listening to people.
And Lewis Central is a growing district, correct?
They're growing, and they have one of the lowest property tax levies in the state.
It is the kind of rural Council Bluffs, right? Am I not mistaken?
No, it is. I mean, it's getting more urban.
Well, it's more urban, but it is the growth part of Council Bluffs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think that one's good. Dallas County, that's kind of a mixed bag, because we saw on our pain index where the county supervisors raised the property tax quite a bit. And I feel that pain because my county did it the year before. But then they actually have a need for the jail. And so you have to kind of weigh those on the prioritization of spending and what those county supervisors have chosen to do with the property tax increases. So I think that's...
I'll just give you my opinion as a Dallas County resident. It's too much too fast. They absolutely need something to alleviate the pressure of having criminal courts on the third floor of the historic courthouse in a booming county. I mean, they're still trying to do business in this small town county courthouse the way that you might in Mills County, and it just doesn't work real well. That having been said, on the heels of a massive property tax increase this year and other bonding that they've put on the ballot in years past, it's just a lot. And so I don't know. I will. I'm gonna really think long and hard about this, whether it's because, and I'm not saying that it's underhanded, but why are you taking the most critical functions of government and running those last after you've saddled us for all of your wants? Then you're going to come back and ask for the needs, and that just sort of rubs me the wrong way.
So I think that's a really great segue into the next issue that we're seeing a lot of are these emergency management system levies, EMS levies.
You read my mind because I want to talk about this a little bit too.
So, and I want all our listeners to know, I used to be a volunteer firefighter. Like, I know the importance of emergency services. I live in rural Iowa. I also know that an ambulance doesn't always show up because I had to call one for my husband not long ago. So I understand it. But the more I dig into this, and just so our listeners know, I will be coming out with something that explains the history and why and how and all of that. Right now, emergency management is funded through the county. There's been some misnomers being floated around that says they're volunteer only, so it's donation only. That is false. Property taxes pay for emergency management right now. Your county elected officials are the ones that decide how much. So if you don't feel like you're getting adequate emergency services in your community, it's because your county supervisors have not chosen to allocate sufficient funds to that service. That being said, could there be more funds dedicated to that? I'm sure there could be in some situations. So I haven't looked at the details of every single county's budget, but I do know that there's a prioritization problem. And when we have non-core government functions taking out the money that should be directed towards things like roads and EMS, I do have a problem with that. So I don't have a problem with spending money on that service. Absolutely I do have a problem with my county levy staying the same or going up, and then them coming back and asking for more money on top of it. It's like, why not prioritize it within the money that you already have? Why do I have to spend 75 cents more for a core service? And so that's kind of the argument that we've got there. And like I said, I'm doing a lot of research on it. It's got a fascinating history, which I can go into if you want, but
I'm going to wait until you're done with the article. I like the model where you write the article and then I can actually try and understand it, and then we talk about it, because then I can learn something before we actually
I mean, I went back all the way to the early 1900s of EMS and who funded it and how it operated. It is fascinating.
It is. It's the wants versus needs. It's the core functions of government, and those things that Iowans depend on most that they cannot do for themselves, like an ambulance, like a sheriff's department. Those things need to come first. And then we get down into some of the, okay, do we need this now? Do we need this at this level now? Maybe it's a bike trail. Maybe it's, whatever else. But, EMS services, it should, I don't understand why we need an extra levy.
Well, and we kind of already have an extra levy for it. It's called your township tax.
Yeah.
Because if you go back into the history, townships are responsible for EMS, and that's what they're supposed to do. And so, like I said, it's been fascinating. I'm still learning more. I get really into this stuff and nerd out on it.
And then you call me and you're like, well, what does this mean? I'm like, I don't know.
I do. I call Chris and I'm like, hey, I found this. What does this mean?
I'm like, don't know on that. But no, it is really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to your article and what you put together on the EMS stuff, because it's a huge driver too in these communities. And look, we bang against government spending and how it's done and how it's structured, but look, ambulance services is an important thing for just about any Iowan. I mean, and you want to be able to call 911 and have someone come help you when things go bad.
Yeah, and if I have to pick between pickleball courts and an ambulance, I know what wins.
Ambulance every
The problem is that right now the pickleball courts are winning, and it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. So, but anyway, there will be some EMS levies on the ballot in November in certain communities, and we're watching those as well, because in the September election, again, turnout was really low. Like in one community, it was 2.3%. So 44 people voted in that election to levy this EMS tax. I hope the turnout is higher in November, and I'm interested to see if that means it's even more overwhelming support for EMS, or if it's different because you have more engagement. So that's something that I'm watching, just because I want to get the feel of how Iowans think about it.
Yep, I do too. Well, that's good. I promise you I wouldn't keep you up here for too long, but anything else that you're tracking, watching, paying attention to right now? This is your chance to, open mic time.
I just like watching what local governments are doing. Yeah. My county did some, I think, questionable things when we talk about the prioritization of funds. A lot of people are, I'm going to say, blinded by this presidential election. Yeah. And everyone is so focused on Trump and Harris, they're forgetting what's going on in their communities. And I just want people to know, you have to pay attention. Because if you don't, these local officials, and maybe it's rightfully so, if nobody shows up to their meetings and they keep voting and they keep doing it and they keep getting elected to office, they think, well, I'm doing fine, right? Yep. Everyone supports me. Yep. And if we spend all of our time over here complaining about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or whomever, then they just get a free pass.
And maybe everyone does support the job that these locals are doing. And maybe they are doing a good job. But if you only got 100 people showing up in an election, it's really hard to claim a mandate one way or the other.
And so that's where, right, the voter turnout is so low. We do polling, and what is it? Over 70% of, it doesn't matter where you sit on the aisle, you want property tax relief. And then I've got county supervisors reaching out to me, asking me for advice and help. So I would just encourage people, don't be popular. Try to be different and focus on those local elections and focus on those local decisions, because that's what's impacting people the most. So when it comes November, my husband's going to be all focused on the high level stuff, and I'm going to be following all these bond elections and seeing which one passed. So
I'm going to try and follow it all, but I'm going to trust that if I miss something on the local stuff, that you'll have it covered for us. So anyway.
Yeah. So just so people know, the debate against Trump and Harris was the night of the September special elections.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there going through my phone, checking county auditor Facebook pages, trying to see what the results were. And I know nobody else on staff was doing that. So I was sending everyone group texts. Look what passed. Look what failed.
I know. And like I said, I have you to follow all that for me. It's wonderful. So, all right, Sarah. Well, thank you very much. That's about all the time we have for today. So we will definitely, I do hear from a lot of listeners, like, when's Sarah going to be on? Because I know you think you're the only one that gets down the weeds like that. We do have a lot of listeners that are really interested in this stuff, and they really appreciate when you're on
I
here
do appreciate that, because I do sometimes feel like I'm on an island in my own little nerdy world.
Well, I can understand why you might feel that way, and that might actually be justified. But there are others out there is what I'm telling you. So anyway, so we appreciate it. So that's all the time we have for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. Don't forget to leave us a positive review. And don't forget to tune in next time, and we will see you then on ITR Live.